Hi, and welcome to Ones and Tooze, FP's economics podcast. Every week we take data and we use it to try to explain the world. I'm Cameron Abadi, FP's deputy editor, with you in Berlin, Germany. As always, Adam Tooze, FP's economics columnist and Columbia University professor, is with us in New York. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Cam.
So, this week's episode happens to overlap with Valentine's Day, so we thought we'd use that as an opportunity to start a new series on the economics of love. So, for the next several weeks, we're going to be spending part of every show talking about romantic relationships from an economic perspective. And we thought we'd start this week with the place that most romantic relationships tend to start, and that is with dating, specifically with dating apps. The data point there is 39%. That is the share of all heterosexual couples who now report having met their partner online. That makes online, including dating apps, the most popular single method of meeting a romantic partner, more popular than all the traditional avenues, whether through family, friends, at a bar, through work, church, in the neighborhood, etc. It's online dating that has surpassed them all. And actually, that means heterosexual couples are only now catching up to same-sex couples. 65% of same-sex couples say they met their partner online, so they have been ahead of the curve. All this adds up to dating apps being in the center of our national romantic life. So, we thought we'd dig in.
Today, there are hundreds of sites and apps. It's gone from taboo to the thing to do. But what impact is this having on society?
We may have become easier to meet, but we are not any easier to love.
How have dating apps changed dating and relationships?
Oh my goodness, I think they have changed them dramatically.
So, Adam, just to generally address the topic of dating, when I was thinking about this, it struck me that as a concept, dating has a kind of inherently market-based logic in some ways. I mean, the idea, right, is that you're comparison shopping in some sense. And maybe I thought that could be put into relief by comparing dating with non-market methods of courtship. So do you have any sense of how courtship worked outside of dating? I mean, and if anything, what does that clarify about kind of the distinctiveness of dating as an institution?
Yeah, this was a really provocative question. I mean, I think to sort of end up with the dating app shopping model, you need kind of three things to happen. I mean, first of all, you need shopping to become a phenomenon. You know, historically speaking, that's a novelty and really a phenomenon of commercial society, so-called. And we have histories of that which go back to the 17th and 18th century. But interestingly, that shopping phenomenon coincides in the West with the emergence of romantic notions of love. So there's kind of a tension here. If you think about, you know, so Bridgerton or you know, more realistically, like Jane Austen novels, you see there the emergence of consumer society, a constant preoccupation with new dresses and so on. But on the other hand, also a deep preoccupation with the notion of romantic love, which rather cuts against that. So that's one, but that sets one dynamic in motion. And then I think the next thing you need is the emergence of dating as a process. I mean, dating, after all, is not the same as courting. It's this sort of space in between. And I guess one would have to say that dating in its modern sense is a kind of even later development, late 19th century, probably really classically 20th century development. And then the third element to really get you into the modern scene would be the really quite radical disinhibition of sexual mores and the opening of the world of heterosexual sexuality to norms of sexuality which are, you know, probably prefigured by the gay cruising scene, essentially. So a much more casual approach to hookups. And if you add all those three things together, I think you do then end up in the world of the modern dating app. I've to be honest, I've never used one, and frankly hope never to have to. But I was allowed recently to look over the shoulder of a much younger member of our family, and I mean, it was absolutely shocking to somebody who never really seen the inside of one of these apps before. I mean, the exactly as you say, the analogy between the swiping and the scrolling through options on the dating apps and online shopping was just, I mean, it was absolutely inescapable. It was completely extraordinary. And it was really just like picking music or something from Spotify. And it was all the more so because the algorithm is clearly quite well trained to select for this member of my family very similar looking people. And so the whole thing had about it a bit more like it was, it was like checking out various models of a stand mixer or a beard trimmer or something on Amazon, and you were offered various features of the same thing. Did you prefer it in this coloration or with this feature? I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary. And I think at that level, totally inescapable that it does indeed conform very closely, at a certain level at least, to, as you're saying, a kind of shopping approach to the world.
Yeah, so perhaps I should also clarify that both Adam and I have never never used dating apps. I also my relationship with my wife goes back before I even had a smartphone of any kind. So that's just a kind of, I guess, buyer beware here, or maybe our alienation from this will be clarifying for some people, that because it's certainly at some, we're approaching the topic from some remove. So maybe that'll be even more clarifying. But yeah, as I also dug into this, I came across several references to dating as taking place in what the economist Alvin Roth called a matching market. And this is a type of market for which Roth, together with another economist, Lloyd Shapley, won a Nobel Prize specifically for their work on developing algorithms to optimize these kinds of matching markets. So I was curious if you could explain what a matching market is, what makes that distinctive, and exactly does that apply to dating? I mean, how does the work that they did and won a Nobel Prize for apply in terms of, I guess, reducing the inefficiencies of dating? I mean, what exactly is the thinking here?
So matching markets are interesting because they go beyond the abstraction of demand and supply, which implies, as it were, a homogeneous commodity which you either want or don't want and compare with other homogeneous commodities. So, apples, for instance, you don't, when you go in and buy an apple, generally speaking, unless you're some extraordinary foodie person, you just pick a bag of apples or pick an apple off a rack, right? You don't spend a great deal of time thinking about whether or not the particular apple you pick is the right one for you. Whereas large numbers of very important markets, including, for instance, the labour market, are matching markets in the sense that an employer is looking for some very particular attributes in an employee, and likewise, an employee is looking for particular attributes in an employer. And what you do, therefore, is to try and figure out the best match. And that's core to the entire operation of the market. And so the question then is how you efficiently arrange markets like that so as to move, out of a situation which could result in really painfully inefficient consequences. And there are a lot of complicated algorithms for deciding how you should order the process through which one or other player in the market makes their selections. But dating, since we're talking about dating, adds another dimension to this because commonly in matching models, it's a question of shifting from a state of being single to a state of being married. And the question really is, can you pick the right person? Whereas dating adds an element of what you might call learning. So in the first type of model, it's simply searching, sifting through an imaginary pool of people. It's that original process of deciding, is this a possible match? And then you have to decide whether to go for it or not. Whereas dating adds, what makes perfect sense, of course, a process by which you can get to know the other person. And that it's as though you could, as it were, take a job for a temporary period and decide whether or not it's a good fit for both sides. And this induces all sorts of really quite complicated trade-offs because, and this is a familiar problem to anyone involved in modern relationships, because nowadays, in a sense, marriage can be thought of as an extended dating period, because at some point, of course, you can terminate it with divorce if things get bad and you decide it isn't a good fit. But in a sense, you're caught in these fundamental dilemmas of how long you stay within a relationship before the learning process you're engaged in reveals to you that you might be better off in another relationship. And there is huge potential for error and inefficiency in a market of that type. Overall, most analyses of matching markets tend to suggest that people don't do enough searching. And so dating is certainly one way of introducing more learning to that process. There are also some rather interesting studies now about the differential effects of technologies on different groups in the population, depending on how they affect two different things. The cost of finding new people you potentially might date, and B, the cost of learning about the person once you've decided to embark on a dating process. And the two effects have very different implications for the market, because if technology enhances people's ability to find new partners, the basic matching process, it will tend to make people pickier, particularly people who think of themselves as high value targets in this kind of market. Whereas technologies that reduce the cost of learning, for instance, the social stigma to dating originally, will tend to cause people to search in a more open-ended way, because the original match is less important than what you may discover through the process of dating a person. So these are all of them deviations from any simple market. They are complications which mean that the simple predictions of economists about the efficiency, the uniqueness, and the stability of equilibria are quite fundamentally compromised. And they are a move, as it were, from the abstractions, therefore, of certain pure theory towards a more realistic understanding, notably of how labour markets work, but also marriage markets. And that's why I think they've attracted as much attention they have. The predictions of these are somewhat ambiguous, however, and indeterminate. In other words, it depends very much then on the specific properties that you add to the learning process, how you imagine people gain the information. And that's changing all the time with new technologies.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was going to say this shouldn't be a surprise, but I guess that when it comes to this kind of economic research, there's not sort of clear, immediate takeaways that can be applied to one's life in terms of dating. I mean, it seems like these are sort of this research sounds sort of broadly illuminating about the sort of situation one is in when dating, but it's not like you can kind of derive clear instructions or lessons for dating from the work
Yeah,
of
it's not
Alvin
management
Ross.
consultancy for
Yeah,
people, for singles, no.
exactly. I know, but there's so much of the
Unfortunately,
kind of
perhaps.
pop literature out there that always kinds of is like, oh well, there's this Nobel Prize winning economics research.
Formula
All you got to
effects.
do is X, Y, and Z. But yeah, I guess life doesn't work that way. But we're talking so much about these apps, and that got me wondering about what exactly is the business model of these apps. And again, I'm professing my own ignorance here. But it seems to me most of these apps, like, there's so many of them these days, and they're free to download. First of all, so I'm like, how do they even make money? And then it got me wondering whether there's even a kind of paradox at work in how these work, because isn't it their interest to kind of keep you in short relationships and thus to keep you continuing to return to the app even as they're promising you sort of successful relationships and sort of on the path towards marriage, which seems to be the presumption of what or some people want out of dating?
Well, I think the free layer is for losers. I think. I mean, I think
Okay, there.
certainly talking to this
What?
younger relative in my
Who are
family,
you calling
you
a? What are you?
you don't rely entirely on the free layer. You pay a premium subscription to get
Hmm.
better matches, or these various sort of power swipes that you can do, which secure more attention for you. I can see what you mean about this incompatibility between, a dating app which promises a route to, married bliss and sustain business. But I mean, first of all, you could say, is this paradox real? I mean, on that basis, you could say that fee-paying colleges that extract fees from students would have, an incentive to never to allow them to graduate. I mean, we would just
Hmm.
keep them in an endless cycle of failed exams and coaxing them to offer us another term's worth of fees. I mean, we don't do that, right? Because
Hmm.
the business model relies on successive cohorts of new people coming through who will also need education, and that could be one way of resolving this paradox. I mean, the other and far more obvious one is to say that the idea that dating apps are about conveying you to the state of married bliss is really a kind of polite fiction, and that
Hmm.
in many ways the protean, the origin of many of the most active dating apps is really just hookups, right? They're really just heterosexual transfers of the flourishing online gay hookup culture, of which the flagship is Grinder,
Hmm.
and in the Chinese world, it's Blued, and those two are the kind of powerhouse, of of more sexually orientated online dating apps. And people have done a huge amount of research on these. And the other reason that people pay and go on these is basically just they're kind of, titillating social media. They're
Mm.
basically, Facebook with all of the pretense removed. And they are basically just a way of entertaining yourself, maybe boosting your ego if you're in the right bracket. In some cases, notably in the gay scene, they're quite explicitly marketed as social media plus sex, right? They are social networking essentially. So it's only really from a relatively conservative heterosexual assumption about where sex fits in
Mm.
people's socializing that there's any real contradiction here. I mean, if you assume that, as it were, people are going to date and then they're going to become monogamously married and the app is to convey you from one state to the other, then indeed there is a problem. But if that is not how sex functions in your social scene, then having recourse to this, it's a bit like Uber, basically, or food delivery services. Sometimes you need to get off, and this is how you do it using this app. So to that extent, they're quite resilient models. And, for what it's worth, they work. I mean, so far, they're really relatively short histories, but I mean, Tinder has $800 million per quarter in revenue, that's sales, and it has very high profit margins of about 25%. So it's bringing in about $200 million per quarter in profit. So they work as business models.
I mean, just to follow up here, it does seem important what you're saying, or worth underscoring. I mean, if there is a kind of social function, if dating has this kind of like social function, in terms of traditionally, in terms of kind of playing a role in eventual family formation, in terms of heterosexual relationships, and this function is being outsourced to these apps that are kind of designed to foreground basically sex rather than other outcomes of relationships. I mean, it seems like if it's sort of structured in this way to privilege with kind of one outcome over another, it does seem like that's something that should be surfaced rather than kind of just sort of be submerged in the background of these apps.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one question would be, what is the relationship between, if these apps create this sort of more open sexual erotic space, the question is maybe how it relates to online pornography as a
Mm,
phenomenon in society, which is all pervasive. At least
mm.
all of the data show this, and is a sort of the masturbatory equivalent of the real experience, the much more high risk experience that can be provided by dating apps. So, I mean, there's no doubt, I think, though, that internet has, to that extent, really opened the boundaries of erotic and sexual, experience.
There is the possibility of some of the economics of pornography, I'm sure. I'm not sure it fits in with the economics of love series, but maybe eventually we'll get around to that. Okay, we'll take a break here and be right back to continue talking about dating apps. Hi, and welcome back. Again, to just dig a bit more into dating apps, it seems like in economic terms, they set up what's referred to as a game theoretical situation. When two people meet on an app or encounter one another, you only have a certain amount of information about the other, and you kind of have to assess and size up and make a decision on the basis of the kind of existing rules and the available information. I guess that got me wondering from an economic perspective, what would be a game theoretical approach to using these apps? There's all sorts of application of game theory to, the politics of nuclear weapons and how to kind of signal to the other side what your intentions are, how to read the signaling of the other side. How does all of that kind of game theory research apply to dating, if at all?
Well, I mean, I guess you could have the kind of economics of signaling, right? So, I mean, maybe that's the function of, something like the naked selfie. I mean, it's a kind of pre-commitment device. Um,
Hmm.
you're saying, are you serious about this sex business? Yes, I absolutely am. Here, this serious. So there's a kind of, commitment function. Again, speaking to this very savvy, very tech savvy younger member of my family who's a regular on these apps. Like he had an entire theory. Apparently, he'd even been involved in telephone calls with the people that run the algorithms of the apps, and he was saying that essentially Tinder in particular was using an ELO style system, which is the ranking system that chess uses, and you can sort of see why, right? Because you rank a chess player by who they've played and whether they win or they lose. And so to win would be to attract a swipe from somebody that you've matched with, and to lose would be to get the wrong sort of swipe, right? It's the left swipe rather than the right swipe. And so the aim of as in chess, you get a higher score for beating a player who's beat more other players. And likewise, I gather in the Tinder app, for a while at least, you got a higher score depending on the person that did right swipe you. If they were themselves highly right swiped, then you would get more status from this, and that changed the way in which your profile was served out in the system. And so, this young relative of mine had an entire tactical system worked out for who you swiped and who you didn't swipe, and what risk you were taking when you swiped a certain way with a certain person, and where you should swipe, and why you should, VPN style, never swipe in a locality that you weren't going to spend any time in because it would reduce your score. And it was this whole thing. I mean, I've now subsequently done some reading on this.
Wow.
And it appears that Tinder now entirely denies that it uses the ELO system. So this information may be just apocryphal, or, a kind of like the street rumor on how you manipulate Tinder, or, from his profile, he's doing just, it's certainly by his own lights, I gather, he's very pleased with the results the algorithm is serving up to him. But I'm not sure whether this is. I wouldn't want anyone to walk away from the podcast, to go away and spend a lot of time researching ELO systems to figure out how to improve their Tinder game. But I think everyone playing this system that's another element of why perhaps it's less like shopping and more like market behavior, because it's really a kind of bargaining with the app. You're not just a price taker in a way. You're actually, after all, or maybe like, the weird way in which you leave recommendations on Uber or Airbnb or something like that. There's this sort of, slightly kind of standoff kind of quality between you and the provider.
Fascinating. Wait, is one score actually visible? Is that how this works?
No.
Okay,
No. It's not directly visible as far. I mean, but again, this reveals our ignorance. How do we know, Cameron? We should probably go find out. But,
I was gonna. That's how this is going to end. Is that this is all fascinating, but
blame it on me.
I'm going to bring my wife in on this later tonight when she comes home. I have to see these, and I actually have to start using them somehow. But yeah.
No, this is a bad idea. Stop it.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess to have a final question, I'm just curious if there's data from these dating apps and that themselves reveal preferences for what we are looking for, what people are looking for in their dating lives, in their romantic partners. Can we take that data sort of at face value, or does it work the other way around? I mean, are the apps steering us themselves to want certain things in that context?
I mean, I don't think there's any doubt at all that the apps steer you towards the criteria that they allow you to specify. So a picture, so they steer you towards, selecting people on the basis of appearance. And some of them allow you to specify basics about education, and some of them allow you to specify quite a lot about education. And so we do have, information and some analysis on what emerges from this. And it's frankly slightly kind of Darwinian feeling, in that there are substantially more men on the apps than there are women on virtually all of the apps, I think. And the evidence seems to be that women overwhelmingly gravitate to the minority of best looking and best educated men, which means at one end that women are competing very hard for a small number of men, and on the other hand, a large number of men get no swipes at all. And so it's a pretty brutal kind of system, which leaves large numbers of people, both women and men, unhappy, because women, unduly large numbers of women end up competing for the same small number of men, and large numbers of men who fall outside whatever the criteria are of attractiveness or education basically have a very borderline kind of humiliating experience. And do it anyway because it's fun, presumably, or it's entertaining, or maybe they relish the degradation. But that's at least the story that I've been able to gather. And people may have, be interesting to know whether we get lots of feedback on this episode from listeners who tell us we've got it all wrong. But that, broadly speaking, corresponds to the, vicarious experience of these apps that I've had with, lovely friends who've had a really bad time on these apps. And it just kind of makes you wonder why anyone really would allow them submit themselves to this kind of rather peculiar selection process, rather than just trying to get to know people in the ordinary old ways.
And to clarify, I mean, it sounds like this. So this is structured in a way that emphasizes the inequalities, and it almost sounds like you're saying that there's a certain group of men that are actually the most privileged. They are the
Yes,
real
I think that's
winners of
true.
these apps.
Yeah, I think that there's a certain group of men who emerge as the winners of this process, which again has a historical. I mean, the same is said after all about the so-called sexual liberation movement of the late 60s and 1970s, which was that a particular group of adventurous men got to have far more sex than they'd ever had before with more women. There were other effects as well, but there is this gendered inequality in which alpha males somehow emerge, perhaps not entirely coincidentally, as the key players. That's the but this is a very one-sided.
Yeah, I just noticed the apps don't market themselves this way. They don't say like,
No, they don't.
come one and all and submit yourselves to the natural dominance of
I'm not sure it's
men.
natural. No, I wouldn't go
yeah.
with natural. It's just anyway, let's
Yeah, sure. Well, exactly. Even worse. Come submit yourself to the men that we decide.
rank
you know,
ordering.
yeah,
It's worse than that. The men that you will decide.
that you
It's
will decide.
You
Yeah,
will.
you
You will.
We'll
It's not
make
us.
sure
It's
you do
you.
decide.
No.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not. There's not. It's more that in the anonymity provided by the app, right? A certain set of selection processes play out. I'm not sure it's an effective manipulation. It's just if you reduce the criteria to these two and then give people,
Hmm.
a secret ballot,
Hmm.
essentially, which is what these apps do. This is the process that gets enacted.
All right. Well, happy Valentine's Day, everyone. We will leave this.
Enjoy getting to know the partner that you're enjoying the day with.
Anyone else who's getting ready for your big date, good luck. And you did this yourself. That's what Adam's saying. All right, we will leave it there for now. We will continue talking about love and the economics of love in the weeks ahead, but we'll leave it here for now. Ones and Tooze is written and edited by me, Cameron Abadi, along with Adam Tooze. It is produced by Laura Rossbrow-Tellem and Rob Sachs. Our social media manager is Claudia Tatey. The executive editor of FP Podcasts is Dan Efron. This show is made possible through the support of foreign policy readers. If you're interested not just in Adam Tooze, but news and analysis from around the world, consider subscribing. Ones and Tooze listeners even get a 15% discount. Just go to foreignpolicy.com/subscribe and use the promo code TOOZE at checkout. That is TOOZE. And listeners, as always, we love hearing your feedback. You can send us voice messages on the Ones and Tooze homepage on foreignpolicy.com, or you can email us, podcasts@foreignpolicy.com, or tweet us. That's at Ones and Tooze Pod. Thanks very much for listening, and we will see you back in your feed next week.